Hello, hello, hello. I've been so looking forward to doing this 9 panel and not doing 9 last either, because it's usually 9s are at the very end of anything that we do because the types begin and end with type 9. But I'm very fortunate to have 3 dynamic people that will work with us today. And the most important thing is that I'm going to approach the material from a lot of different angles. And if you're familiar with my other panels, they're not just panels that are directing people in a particular way exclusively. They're teaching panels. So the point being, I'm trying to help people understand the emotional need and concern of each Enneagram type. Not just what we can read in a book, but what it means to be that type. And I will ask each of the 3 panelists to answer whatever question I come up with. And I want to begin by introducing them, and then I'll go into the summary description. And what I started to say is that I approach these panels in a very particular way, with the main motivation being to help people see the inner works of the type. Yes, I'll refer to their motivations, but more I will ask the panelists a question that may seem very generic, but the way they respond are often great indications of their type. So sometimes it'll even be their subtype or their tritype. And what do I base that on? Well, tens of thousands of interviews that I've done and many tests with the adjectives. So I'm familiar with the adjectives that types prefer to use. And I knew lexicon long before I knew the Enneagram. I know body language and micro-expressions I knew long before I ever learned the Enneagram. So there are many systems I'm employing, but if one of the panelists says something in a particular way, I'm going to explain to you what's underneath that and why the 9 feels the way they do, just as I have with the other panels so far. I hope in some ways that it'll be fluid, but for those of you that have seen panels before, what will be different is that I'm teaching through them, not just interviewing. I'm really trying to put it together so that we can go deeper and understand, in this case, the 9 even better. Okay, so Val, I started with you. Now it's a real advantage to see the person speaking because you will see their micro expressions, the way they move, the gestures, the tone, so many qualities of type. So back to you, Val. When did you learn about the Enneagram? And did you ever think you were a type other than a 9?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Yes, I started looking at the Enneagram last year accidentally via another author, and I resumed it this year. And I initially thought I was an 8. I thought I just had anger, so it must be an 8. And I did Katherine's Enneagram test, and I sort of came out 50-50 between an 8 and a 1. And so I thought, okay, in that case, maybe I'm a 1 then. But it turns out that, yeah, I think I was just blind to being a 9. So.
Well, and really what's so important is that I've had the test program to alert people when they choose like opposites within a center. So 8 and 1 are the wings of 9. So it's pointing to the 9. So in a way, it's not that he didn't get his type, it's just he saw the sides, the wings of his type, which is very common for the 3, 6, and the 9. Why is that? They're the primary types. The hexad types, 1, 2, and 4, 5, and 7, 8, are variations on theme. So 9 is the real type. I'm just a counterfeit 9 as an 8. And if you're a 1, you're just a variation as well. So going from that perspective, it's very easy for a strong-willed person, and by the way, everybody gets angry. It's the definition of anger, how long we suppress it, how quickly we express it. There's so many factors that, yes, Tritype will influence that, type will, but a 9 with an 8 wing can have those frustrations. And I've done anger management classes with all 9 types. We all get angry. It's a misnomer to think only 8s get angry. It was a stereotype. And when that happened, it was simply because when the information was disseminated, the true core issue of the 8, which is this need to make things even, to make them square, or what we might call vengeance, was really the focus. But the 8s are not uncomfortable with anger, and other types can be. So what Val's saying is so important. A lot of times people think, oh, I can't be a 9 because I get angry. No, it's much more complex than that. It depends on your instinct and what you're getting angry about. Is it over your resources? Is it your place or position within a group? All this comes into play as well. And varying tritypes. And this is also where history comes into play. Like, did we get a chance to be heard? Were our traits and tendencies valued or understood? Or was the family system so different that we didn't get a chance to express our frustrations or our creativity or the way we wanted to be in the world? So let me carry on and go to Alex.
Hello, hello. So I first started learning about the Enneagram in 2000. I think I encountered it in 2012 and didn't start exploring it till 2013. My sister sent me an email saying, hey, everyone in California, she lives in San Francisco, so she's like, everyone here is really into the Enneagram, you're type 8. And I started researching it. About a year later, I got much more into it. I had kind of been raised on the Myers-Briggs. I learned about the Myers-Briggs when I was like 13 years old. So I thought I knew everything I needed to know. And then I started, scratching the surface of the Enneagram and realizing there's a lot here that the Myers-Briggs doesn't cover. I initially tested as equal in 5 and 9, and I identified as a 5. It took me about 6 months to go from there to identifying as an 8. And I think about 3 months from there until my wife texted me actually during my bachelor party and said, oh my God, you're not an 8, you're a 9. And then I had this big ego defense, oh my God, no. But then discovered immediately that that's true. So I guess I identified as a 5 because the identification with being smart was kind of like a strong thing in my mind. Again, I was told at 13 I was an ENTP, and I loved the idea that meant that I was smarter than other people, which is not what it means. But I was very identified with that. And I also think I wanted to justify my withdrawal a little bit, justify my fear of engaging by saying, oh, it's a good thing because I'm a studious kind of person. And obviously that's not how the system works, and that's not what a 5 is, and that's not what being any type is about. It's not about your strengths, it's about your weaknesses. Then I shifted to identifying as an 8 because I wanted to identify as strong. I, was in a sales career at that time, real estate in New York City, and I basically had a chip on my shoulder about the fact that I was not assertive. At the same time, I identify as having a stronger 8 wing than 1 wing, though, like you were saying, nines, the primary types have both wings at work, but I think the 8 side is stronger for me. And I could resonate with a lot of what the 8 was saying, and what the 8 struggled with. However, when I when I were, bring myself back and observe how I actually act in stress, it takes a lot for the anger to finally come out. And when it doesn't, it comes out in a very 8-ish way, but 99% of the time, that's not what's happening.
You've just said so much that's so valuable. So here's another 9 that identified with 8. Very common. I can't say enough about how the primary types do not see themselves, so they identify with the other types, but they don't quite land until they recognize that they're a core type, and all 3 core types are in motion. They move more to one another than, well, they do, because it's the law of 3, so they're automatically moving to each other. But all types use both wings. And the way Naranjo described it, and Ichazo as well, is that your type is a result of the tension between the 2 wings. So we're trying to be both at the same time. So the 9 is trying to be that person that can make a decision really quickly and handle things, and the 9's also trying to get it right. And if there's a conflict within the mind or senses of the 9, they don't know what to do. They're trying to hold neutral. So 3, 6, and 9 are trying to hold neutral for their center. Now, what I found pretty quickly into my research is that the 9s will go along to get along, and they will merge, but it's not their first choice. The first choice of the 9 is for the desired others, singular or plural, to merge with the 9. But when that doesn't happen, then they merge with their selected others. But they're no different from anyone else. They want people moving towards them and doing what they want to do. But they're not going to risk separation from others by overly asserting their preferences. In fact, the whole defense strategy is designed to allow and go along and get along. And if we look at it as a biological imperative, you have to have more people trying to get along for a society to work. Otherwise, it would be chaos. And there are more of the primary types than there are the hexad types for the same reason. You can't have lots of 1s and 8s, because what's going to happen? The values are going to clash. We need both, but there'd just be too many intense play out of different views, different dogmas, different ideology, and depending on how emotionally healthy types are, it varies. But the defense strategy itself for the 8 is immediacy. The defense strategy of the 1 is hesitating, doing the due diligence to get it right. So if you're a 9, you're going to be feeling both at the same time. So how does the 9 make a decision? Based on conviction, based on what they already know to be true. And from the gut, not fixation. They're not making a decision based on fixated beliefs, nor are they making decisions based on their heart. They think they are, because you can be very heartful. But the actual energy is from the gut of like what is right in terms of a visceral level of right. So that was just perfect for you to bring up, Alex, fellow ENTP. And what the reason it's important too is that the smart intellectual 9 was not in the literature. So you wouldn't recognize yourselves as 9s. So all the 9s I know that were really smart would identify with 5 because both are withdrawn, both withhold, both can be quiet and smart. So we have to delineate what is the defense strategy, not the behavior, because any of us can have good or bad behavior. And in the case of the 9, it's to acquiesce unless it feels viscerally wrong. And then they assert, and they're unbelievably strong. In fact, the strongest of all 9 types, because they have the power of patience, persistence, and endurance. It's very dynamic. But it's the we, not the singular. Depending on the instinct, it will vary. Kanika, how long have you known the Enneagram, and do you ever think you're another type?
Hi. I hope you can hear me because I'm having a little
we
challenge. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So I'll just go ahead. I know the Enneagram, I think almost 20 years, so a long time. And I used to think that I'm a 7 when I first got to know the Enneagram. So I thought I was a 7. I kind of, now that I look back on it, is probably the social 9. I was very active, so I didn't really categorize myself as a 9. But also, my dad was a 7, which was like my, I was very close to him. So I think I just adjusted to his pace, basically, and I adjusted to, being into doing fun things and moving faster than I usually would. Mm-hmm. And I actually learned a lot about the Enneagram before I found out I was a 9. Actually, test because I was sure that was my number. Until somebody else pointed it out to me. It was actually a friend therapist. And it was really like this moment of revelation, because of course I knew enough about the Enneagram to know that it was true when she said it, but I just hadn't seen it. Like I just never considered it, but it was really this moment of course, so that was a few years into knowing the Enneagram. I would say 3 years maybe into knowing it. And actually what happened was relief. The same initially was like Alex said. First there was that defensiveness, like, oh no, that's so uncool in comparison to the 7, But the second one was absolutely like this relief of not having to that speed that was just not my tempo, and to not have to dance on 10 weddings at the same time, is how we say in German. I don't know if you have that expression in English, but so there was like something that just kind of was like, I can, like, that's just not who I am. Like, that's why it's also so exhausting to me to keep that up. So there was, and then really a lot happened for me in terms of just understanding myself. And I think one of the big keys was the numbness. Like, that's just something I hadn't recognized as, like from an outside perspective. I was so in it that I didn't see it as a feeling. I didn't have that separation from it. So that was one of those big nuggets that really,
one of the ahas.
helped me.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
The numbness is a part of denial. So 8, 9, and 1 all use denial to manage stress and chaos and emotional distress. And why is that? Well, the 2, 3, and 4 are focused on shame and the terrible grief they feel when they have shame. And the 5, 6, and 7 are focused on paranoia because of the chaos that they feel. And what many people do not realize is that gut types are actually merging both the shame and the grief from the heart center and the paranoia and chaos of the head center. So it's so overwhelming that all gut types shut down and go into denial. If you're totally aware of so many things that could kind of disrupt your ease and your flow, especially as a 9, it would serve your defense strategy to go numb. It's just, do we want to do it consciously or unconsciously? And what's so meaningful and important about the Enneagram is to discover what we do unconsciously so that we can become unconsciously competent. So, Kanika, you said 7. That's just like 8. Many, many, many 9s will see themselves as 7s, especially the social. You're correct. And the difference is the tempo and the pacing, for sure. But also there's a type of graciousness the 9 employs that the 7 doesn't. Just different defense strategy. When we get to 7, we'll talk about that. But the 9 needs that, especially social 9, needs that communal feeling, that ease, everyone being in harmony. And 9s can be cool all by themselves. You don't have to be a 7, but 7s, when we were kids, always thought of fun things to do for sure. But then 7 is the leader of the group hierarchies. That's what they're meant to focus on, where the 9 is meant to focus on union and harmony and coming together. Now, some of you may notice that even though she thought she was a 7, she doesn't even have 7 in the head center. And that's because when you look at Tritype, it reveals a lot, and each type lost an important chunk of data through the transmission of the Enneagram. And I came to realize some of this just from research, but then having the opportunity to attend intensives with Naranjo and with Ichazo really helped me understand more about the types. And then the research itself, which was based on all of you, people answering questions, being willing to be interviewed. Like right now I'm looking at empathy styles and Enneagram based on type, Tritype, and instinct. It's at EnneagramTritypetest.com. I'd love to have you participate because it teaches us more and more and more. So let's get into it. I promise to always read my little summary description. But the 9 is the peaceful person, the mediator, peacemaker, harmonizer, connector, and pleasant person. They like those words. They relax when they hear them. But originally, these different words evolved because the authors of the first books could not use each other's terms, be copyright infringement. So a lot of times, the names themselves were indicative of what an author needed to do and aren't necessarily the best description of the type. But all apply. So the summary description is 9s believe that the world requires them to blend in and be accepted. They want to be the every person, just like the 6 and the 3, but the 9 wants to be that person that's seen as kind, allowing, and accepting. They learn to substitute, keyword, comfort and belonging for a sense of personal importance and worth. And what does that mean? That the 9 puts their preferences on the back burner because it's hard to be in union and tandem with others if you have an agenda, if you're headed a particular place. Now, you might find ways, depending on your Tritype and your Myers-Briggs type and other factors, to get people excited about what you're doing. But overall, you have to sacrifice standing out as number one if it means it'll separate you from the people you care about. So their attention goes to the views and agendas of other people. They're chosen people, by the way. And sometimes people will say to me, but what about if it's a boss? Well, they choose to be in a good type of rapport with their boss, and they don't want to lose their job. So that's important too. But because they focus on this, the views and agendas of others, what results is the ability to see all points of view. Now, we all have heard about this incredible gift that the 9 has of being able to see all points of view. But can they see their own? No, much harder. Much, much harder. But what's important is the 9s have taught me that they see all points of view, but they remain unconvinced by any. Because there's always a possibility that they could be wrong, you could be wrong, something could be wrong, and it's better to always just hold a broader perspective. They're really great at building consensus, especially as managers. They work well with teams, but they don't like to assert. Like for many, many years, I worked with the Federal Reserve banks, and in particular the Bank of San Francisco, since I'm out here in California. And there would be quite a few really talented 9s that would just ascend the ranks and get to high-level positions. And I had taught there so many years, like 15 years, that I had enough people in every department to do panels so that they were talking to other fellow employees. And when I got to the decisiveness with the 9s, they would talk about, spreading it around, or not putting all their eggs in one basket, or the peanut butter principle that just smooth it out. So if one thing fails, something else might be working, and being focused on that. And that they felt where they struggled was making decisions that were really decisive. So if you look at the gift of this also is that they do have the ability, if they're feeling confident and it's not about them, they're really good at seeing what might help others come into harmony. Now, the really shy, introverted 9 may want to do that, but not do it as frequently as the extroverted 9. They dislike tensions of any kind and conflict. They're very helpful too, which is why they can also identify with 2s and 6s. But here's the thing. The 9 is helpful when they feel someone's tension or their disquiet or their anxiety or chaos, and they want to restore the calm. It's in their field. They're a gut type. If there's chaos in their domain, they want to relax. They want to calm it down. So the natural thing is they'll just offer assistance. But they're not looking around like a 2 to see a way to identify what's needed emotionally. They do it in the moment. When it arises, they're not looking for it. They're looking for the harmony and the ease instead. They're looking for diversion. Now, when the 9 identifies with 5, that's the last point I'll make with the introductions, is that the 9 loves to read, or they may love history, or doing lots of things that we might think of as 5. Especially many years ago when I started with the Enneagram. If you were an introvert, and you had a lot of books and you wanted to be alone and read, bingo. And you were smart, maybe a little awkward, you were a 5. But actually, it doesn't work like that. It's the content of what the 5 likes to read versus what the 9 likes to read. The 9, even though they can have diverse interests, they're often reading to maybe learn something they care about, like this, the Enneagram, but it's mostly to escape, to move away from things that are tedious, things that are overwhelming, to restore the sense of calm. Whereas the 5 is reading to research. Now, we all say we research now because of the internet. We can just go on and type something and see how many places it comes up, and 15 people say this, and only 2 people say this. So the 15 people must be right. And then the 9 will say, wait a minute, but what if those 2 people are right and the 15 people don't know what they don't know? So the 9s are very savvy that way because it just won't sit right with them. They won't be able to necessarily explain it, but they have a good sense looking outward. But now when they're growing up, on the other hand, they focus on the needs, concerns, and values of their parents. They are the ideal child that wants to become the ideal person. So it's very distressing to the 9 when they want something that is not valued. And they feel like they have to either go without or find a way to have that thing with nobody looking. Like if they're on a diet, for example, they may not have the ability to eat sugar because insulin problem, or maybe they have cholesterol problems. And so they'll eat really well in front of their spouse or those in their family, whatever the issue is. But then as soon as they're away from that scenario, they go get what they want. They're a strong type. They're not going to go without what they want, but they are good at delaying it. Whereas conversely, the 8 will say, yeah, like in my case, I'm allergic to chocolate, but I feel like chocolate right now. And not only that, I want the Hostess Twinkie chocolate. And hey, I'll get a Slurpee with that. Since I don't have time to go get it because I'm working so much, I'll just have 7-Eleven deliver it. It'll be right up front. It won't be hidden. But the 9 has this defense strategy of harmonizing, neutralizing. So they can't assert in that way. So an important thing too is the worldview. And that is that the 9 sees that the world works if everybody stays calm, everybody does their part, and then we'll all be at ease. They believe in solidarity though, so that's a very important factor. So at what age, Alex, did you notice that having situations that were calm were really important to you?
I think I knew it from very early on, and I developed a lot of exactly how you were describing, delaying my needs and getting my needs met, outside of the view of, whoever the others are, because of my family environment where I had a 2 mother who spent most of her time in that like level 7 zone where she's still perfect, but she's not like overtly telling you what to do, but you did that and that makes me uncomfortable. So there was a lot of like pressure to not assert myself, and I fit right into that. But very early, I started, just staying in my room. It's like the whole family's together downstairs watching TV, and Alex is playing video games, or oh, I'm hungry, but I don't want what my mom cooked, so I won't eat much of my dinner. And then they'll all go to different rooms, and then I'll sneak back into the kitchen and raid the fridge for what I really wanted, and it started, I mean, I can, when I'm picturing those behaviors, I want to say like 8, 9, 10 years old. And I mean, it's continued to, I still comfort seek. I tend to not comfort seek as consciously in reaction to things. And I tend to, know now to just say, hey, I don't want that. But definitely that tendency is still there, where it's there's a little tugging voice saying, oh, well, maybe this person doesn't want you to want that,
Yeah, and do you remember needing to feel like an ideal child to
Yeah.
match the world in which you were growing up in?
Yeah, very much so. And again, like with my mother, as a sexual dominant type, the tendency of the 9 to idealize the other and join with the other is more focused on single people. And so, my mother really wanted to be bonded to me, and I really wanted to be bonded to her. And it was so easy for me to show her what she wanted to see. It was not hard at all. It was very apparent. And so that fulfilled me in making me feel safe in that connection. But still then led to blocking out other important areas of my own development, which I had to race to catch up on when I became an individual and an adult.
Yeah, it's so true. We all have an area where we're age progressed,
Mhm.
and an area where we aren't, because we're operating from the blind spot of our type and tritype and instinctual stacking, kind of how they all merge in particular. But in the case of the 9, there is enough success young that you can make that person happy, whether it's a teacher or a parent or your friends. And if you don't say what really bothers you, or you don't show that you don't like the meal and you're pleasant, it's a mask of pleasantness that helps the 9 endure having a defense strategy that says, don't claim your preferences, don't individuate,
Mm-hmm.
bring people together, even if you're not social.
Mm-hmm.
And in your case, you lead with the sexual, but you have social second, which creates a desire to find your mate and then venture forth, so to speak, in the world with your mate. And extroversion adds another level of that. And of course, ENTP, I love all the systems. In fact, I've been asked to do a panel just having a bunch of different people with different tritypes and stackings, and just talk about what that means and let people see how I work with them. But in this case, with Alex, if you understand ENTP and the 972, leading with sexual, it's very important, because the 9 is the type most inclined to merge, but the sexual is the most inclined to fight. Like if you think of animals during the mating season, they show their plumage, they fight for dominance. So it's a misnomer or misunderstanding, really, to believe that the 9 doesn't have that in them. Again, they're the center of the gut center, the center of the anger triad. It's there, it's operating. It's just a question of how, when, and where. So the sexual 9 will usually identify with the 8 wing. But if someone happens to have a tritype that pays attention to nuances and details, or they have some qualities, like let's say in Myers-Briggs and SJ, the 9 will think they're a 1 in the tritype. So it's all wonderful when you put it together. Thank you. Kanika, what about you? How did you and when did you notice that you were, I know you had to go after the fact because you thought you were 7 at first, but when you looked back, at what age did you start to notice that you were pushing your personal needs down in front of others so that you would not be a problem? So you could hold the position of being the nice, kind, easygoing person.
Early, like really early. I think maybe really with 3. I want to say, like, as far as I remember back, or even situations when I remember back, it was always kind of a scanning for how to be, like you said, the ideal child, like not to be too little, not to be too much, not to be too less. It wasn't even the disappearing. It was really the moderating for what was wanted, for what was needed, for what felt harmonizing. What felt harmonizing the field, and actually being a social. I grew up in community, so for me it was very much about wanting to have everybody together at all times, and feeling like even if there was disruption in there, I had to stay around to somehow, I guess that was like where I felt in control. If I'm still in it, I can do something about this. While rather like being in a room and hearing shouting outside of the room would have been, that was later, of course, but would have, like, I would have felt drawn still to be in the group, like family group, community, to, I don't know, to level it out if you want. It's just also just a sense feeling. It's not obviously something that I thought about, but if I look back on it, and also knowing that I do the same nowadays in different ways, I can see that I've done that all my life, actually.
It's just second nature. It's what the 9's meant to do. Like, I remember one time when I was in junior high, we were going to a football game, and I was 12, I believe. And it was California, Santana. I lived in Newport Beach, and in the fall, it would get really hot. Sometimes they'd even send us home from school. The air quality was compromised, but it was October, it was a football game. And my grandparents were over and having dinner with my parents, but my 9 brother and my 1 brother and I were all going to a football game together to meet up with our friends. And we wanted to sit in the cheering section, so we needed to wear white. And so we're heading out the door, and my grandmother says, "Oh, you need to bring a coat." And I'm like, "What? It's like 90 degrees. I don't need a coat." But she was just self-pres, thinking about if it got cold later, not even thinking about the fact that it was a Santana. And I said, "Oh, no, it's way too hot. And when people are jumping up and I'll have to take the coat off. People jumping up and down, they'll ruin my coat. And I can't wear it and be in the cheering section. We all have to wear white." See, I'm looking to my brothers. They're wearing white shirts. And then my grandparents stiffened a little bit, and then off we went. Well, we walk out the door, and my brothers just take their jackets and stuff them in the bushes and keep going. I go, "Wait, why didn't you just tell them you weren't going to be wearing your jacket?" And they said, especially my 9 brother, "I don't want to make waves. I know what they want. I'll just give them what they want, but I'm not going to carry around a jacket when it's like 90 degrees. And I thought, according to the 8 value, it's, wait a minute, that's not the truth. But according to the 9 value, it is the truth. Because the 9 knows what people want from them. And they're really good at delivering it. In fact, with many 9s where I've done coaching over a long period of time, eventually we can get back and discover that it's either pre-verbal, and they might even remember something as simple as being a little baby being so excited over a toy or a rattle, and just doing so much that the mother, especially if the mother's a 6, goes, oh, you're scaring me. What are you doing? And the 9 thinks, oh, I can't show my excitement. So that's an extreme example, but let me tell you, it's very, very true for 9s. There's a subduing of their natural joy, intensity, and they find other ways for that outlet. But there's a mismatch early on, because who can be that ideal all the time? None of us. But they try. And the way the 9 tries is by going to sleep to themselves. And in a way, we already are. Each type has their own version of it, and 8, 9, and 1 are all asleep to themselves. So it could even be pre-verbal, is what I'm saying. Okay, so Val?
Yeah, I was the youngest of 3. So, yeah, I looked to everybody as knowing what they do is obviously the right thing. And so I didn't make any waves. And yeah, it was very much just sort of keeping the calm and ensuring that everything was in harmony. If there was any kind of arguments, I just made sure that I wasn't involved in them, so that nothing was aimed at me. And the only time I did feel that I kind of was arguing was predominantly with my brother and sister to make sure things were fair. But being the youngest, I just had to put up with whatever they said. So yeah, I kind of ended up just sort of bottling up and keeping it undercover.
I love your right there. He just used a great word for 9, bottling up. And in NLP terms is very visual and kinesthetic, but it's still just a great word. I don't use that word at all. It's not in my vocabulary, yet when I hear a 9 say it just or people with 9 in the Tritype, it matches so perfectly, but it doesn't arise within me. Now, if I'd had a parent maybe that said it all the time, I might, but I don't know, because we're identified with our own concerns. Usually it's pre-verbal with 9s, that mirroring as an infant, the way you're mirrored in a way infants are designed to track their caregiver and be pleasing to their caregiver as much as possible till they cry, so that they can have what they need. And those cute, adorable eyes that make us go, oh, isn't he or she cute? So if you don't remember consciously thinking about that, it was probably so early that it was just, especially as the youngest. But do you remember the day when you consciously thought about it and how old you were?
Not really. It's just something which it's just always been there.
Mm-hmm. And what about the amiable part? Like the 9 wants not just harmony, but just this comfort, because the substitution for being the one that's in charge, although 9s can be in charge in their own way, is to substitute other things, other pleasures of any kind. It could be gaming, it could be favorite foods, it could be sleeping, could be anything. But did you find from a pretty young age that when you felt stressed out that you wanted to just go take a nap or go distract yourself with something? And if so, what kinds of things did you like to do? Beginning as a little boy.
So just a little bit before that, I mean, whenever anybody wanted to play a game or do some activity, I was very much up for it and joined in. When it turned out, when I wanted to do an activity and no one ended up wanting to do it, I tended to withdraw. I think my sort of go-to place was drawing, as well as just playing with Lego and sort of toy soldiers in those days. So that was my kind of escapism.
And were you then happy when you could go into your own world, or were you still thinking about the fact that they didn't play things the way you wanted, the way you did with them? What way?
It was very much numbing it, really. I did find that it just allowed me to sort of avoid thinking about it, and also I'd say feeling about it as well. Talking about sleep, I usually found that even if I went to sleep angry, the next day after having slept on it, I would just see that a new day is a new way of approaching things, and the problem was I never resolved the issue. I just kind of, it's a new day, let's just continue on. So it was effectively numbing it.
It's burying it.
Mm.
The whole gut center buries, but in particular, the 9 does. So the emotion is intense, but it's buried deep within the structure of what you let into awareness. So it isn't resolved any more than it is for any other Enneagram type, but the perception is that the 9 is easygoing. And comparatively speaking, the 9 is the most allowing and accepting person. And I want to stay with you for my next question here and move the reverse direction. But what I'm moving to is the way in which you managed if 2 people you cared about, so 2 friends, your parents, or siblings, or schoolmates, or a teacher with a schoolmate, any 2 people that you felt this need to step in and mediate, what did it feel like before you did or did not say something? What would come in your mind even if you didn't say it? And if you did say it or do it, what would it be?
Gosh, trying to recall. I tend to sort of remember things and then again sort of just bury them. So in situations where issues between people, I think my sort of, depending on who they are, I would sort of step in and sides and in a way also kind of distract and look for positive things between them. I'm sort of thinking back to sort of early days. It's sometimes difficult sort of to resolve the issue at the time, but it was more sort of distraction. That's seems to be what worked, and doing some activity like soccer or football. So just to sort of effectively have harmony.
So doing something, encouraging people to do something together that would take their minds off of their differences.
Very much so, yeah. As being as a team, yeah.
The other thing with 9 is that whereas the 9 can go along to get along, when they're in a sport, they're not going along to get along. All of a sudden you see the competitive side of 9 and a really strong person. This can happen with 5s too. And people don't realize it. Just because someone's quiet or withdrawn doesn't mean they're going to acquiesce in a sport that's competitive. But they often will choose sports that are more individualistic rather than group. But soccer's group, definitely. I was going to lead into the discounting. So a lot of times, most of the time, 9s will discount the importance of something. Like, well, it doesn't matter anyway. Who cares? Doesn't make any difference. So almost talking yourself out of having that intense feeling by minimizing. or discounting or bringing down the value. Do you ever remember doing that?
I think I do that all the time. Especially when it comes to my own requirements, I will discount them or put them on the back burner. I would say I don't discount other people's requirements. I try to work with them or provide in some way which allows them to achieve that goal. But I tend to discount and put my own requirements last. That's sort of changing with time because it gets to a point where you can't put your things last, and it's just a matter of how that comes to the front and it's how it's handled.
It's such an important piece, Val, because the first thing the 9 has to do, beginning as soon as possible, but for sure by the teenage years, is to begin that process of feeling comfortable with individuating. And that has to begin with making your preferences known. And the reason that nothing really encourages the 9 to make their preferences known is that by doing so does not make someone give you what you want. It just makes you more aware that they don't give you what you ask for. So 8, 9, and 1 in particular all won't declare it because they feel a declaration of what they want is an opportunity to be hurt when it's stated that your need will not be met. So the 9 may seem easygoing or indifferent about things, but that's not true at all. There has to be a fraction of a second where you put it into denial because it hurts so much. Do you remember that? Do you feel that?
Oh yeah, very much so. When you find that your sort of you think sort of modest requirements or wishes are discounted or invalidated, it is very infuriating, and it just seems like it's not fair. And I think that's an issue. I think with well, certainly myself, where I find it's difficult sometimes to comprehend that that your wishes are not being taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So it's easier on the defense strategy of the 9 to just not put it at risk. Now you might with an intimate, but in life, generally, the 9 will have their sense of dominance by going and getting what they want or trying to get people to do what the 9 wants. But if they can't kind of get someone to do it, then they feel really hurt, really, really hurt. But it has to be shut down so fast. A lot of times 9s will have a kind of innocence, even sometimes lasting into their 20s or early 30s. Let's say if they want to be a doctor, and of course that education is prolonged, any field that takes a lot of years, but they'll have all these wonderful ideas about healing and making a difference. And then they get caught in the system where what they feel needs to be done can't be done because the system doesn't agree with it. So the 9 tries to get around the system and use the defense of not knowing. And what that is, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't realize that rule applied in this way. And it gives the 9 at least a chance to try and do what they feel is right for others. But if it's a structure that just does not allow variation, it's heartbreaking to the 9, and the 9 will start shutting down more and more to this feeling or that feeling or a number of different feelings. Thank you, Val. How about you, Alex? The discounting and the invalidating yourself.
Yeah, well, that's sort of the default, and it requires assertion to not have that be the case. I went through a string of, kind of phases. I had like kind of a cutoff moment in early adulthood where I said, I'm growing. I'm not gonna, just accept the, the momentum and the direction that I'm headed in because that doesn't seem to be working out very well. And I kept on pushing through a hump and then feeling incredibly proud of myself and being like, all right, that's great. I did it. I grew, and then I went back to discounting myself just without the major oppression of whatever it is that I pushed through, be it a job, a familial relationship, or this or that, and actually that was happening kind of in conjunction with my learning about the Enneagram. And so I got a lot of like tidbits of really good, wise, here's what you need to know about yourself. And then I would take an action and make an assertion and then go back to accommodating the new environment. So it's a really sticky habit. And it takes, I guess my perspective now is that just active assertion over time is the only remedy. Getting comfortable with the assertion, learning that, the feeling that I'm not supposed to do that because it's going to make waves, knowing that that's the wrong feeling, that's a feeling telling you to do something that's not going to help you. And, you start to see how every time you feel that, and then you let it be swept under the rug, it gets bigger, So it's definitely still like, I guess I can try to think of examples. And a lot of it, actually, I'll use what you were saying about the institution, and, kind of entering and then weaving around institutions. My career trajectory has been sort of the biggest dynamic where I'll step into a company with ideas of what I want to get out of this job. And then the second I'm in the door, I'm, waving the company flag, seeing what others expect me to do, falling into line with, team structures or with a boss, before I started doing my own independent coaching work, I was in property management, and I had a boss who was a classic 3-wing 2 in the lower levels, where kind of no recognition for anything but his own goals, and then also rejecting the kind of like depth and focus on the material that you need, and just literally his job was maintaining his image. And it was really hard for me to work for that person, even though I knew consciously, okay, I'm a manager. I was managing a property and he was a regional manager overseeing. And so even knowing, his wishes are steering my ship in the wrong direction, and he's asking me to enact orders that aren't so good for the people that I'm responsible for. That was like a very good example of, I felt strong pressure to acquiesce to the system, and he was in a certain position. And so kind of like the stressing to 6, I could see myself start to really just sink into the expectation and the structure in the system. And, ultimately my solution for that was to quit, actually. And a lot of times I find myself with that, stand up and fight, or maybe go do something different and leave the fight to someone else, or maybe, I couldn't win that fight anyway, so I fight it.
There's wisdom that comes from that too. 9 is the one that teaches us that. I was married to a wonderful 9, for 23 years, and he would help me with everything. I'd say, this person needs help. Can't you just write that letter? He's an attorney, so he had a lot of good skills. And I would say, no, we need to act on this right away. And he'd say, no, we need to wait. And actually, we were both right. I needed to slow down and let some of the things play out. And he needed to kind of keep things from becoming bigger. But either way, there's this gift of 9 of being able to understand that point and teach the rest of us the power of kind of stepping back and seeing how the 9 feels on a gut level about something. I can always ask a 9. I may not know their preferences, but I can always ask a 9, do you trust that guy? And they'll have an absolute answer. There will be no ambiguity. Suddenly, the tendency to try and play both sides and all sides really, and what might at times appear to be changing, doesn't change at all. It's absolutely clear to the 9.
It's the gut feeling. It's the yes or the no, the binary, yes to this person, no to this person, and you treat them the same because you want to acquiesce, but you always know deep down. And to the point of the wisdom, I guess one of the things that I really learned that was probably it was much more recent lesson is that while often the 9, will do the right thing by letting things be and being patient and letting things resolve themselves, it's not wisdom unless you're there and present and acknowledging, I'm choosing to do this, and there's a lot of the false Buddha thing, the false enlightenment and the false
bypassing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, this seems like the right thing to do, and maybe it is the right thing to do, but our experience as the 9, we're not really being wise. We're being fearful. So the strength needs to be there when you're making the right action. And I guess just as a man too, there's a lot of rhetoric to be more confrontational and be more assertive and be more goal driven. And that there are a lot of messages in that drain a 9's power because you really internalize that. But I've never gotten results on anything really when from just a sheer force of will, I'm going to blast through this. It's always consistency, showing up every day, and that's the hardest thing to do because your defenses want you to go and do your comfortable thing, go to your inner sanctum, go and just do what makes you feel null. But it's only through showing up that, every moment is as far as you can actually get yourself to engage and do that, that your wisdom really comes forward and it matters.
And really what you're talking about is that the 9 does not want to be the one that names the problem, because like any messenger, it's put on you. Like the 8 will name any problem that they perceive as a problem. But instead of people realizing that they were aware and tracking something critical, then the attention goes to the 8, like maybe you're the problem. But the 8 can't not do it, just as the 9 can't overtly act with aggression unless it feels like life-threatening to the hindbrain, even if it isn't life-threatening. But the point I want to make is that passive aggressiveness, whether we're aggressive or passive aggressive, human beings are going to do both, whichever suits the situation. But if you have a defense strategy that says don't overtly assert, it's going to be harder for you to do that. You'll be better at withholding than you will be at at asserting. And I'm going to take it a step further. A lot of times people that are passive aggressive as their stance rather than aggressive believe that they need to become aggressive. I totally disagree. I think that we are hardwired the way we are, and that we need to just become conscious of the anger we're feeling, no matter how we express it. And especially the 9, if the 9 expresses something with overt anger, they never get what they want. And they then feel just terrible. It doesn't work. Whereas the types that can get really angry, they're usually just hurting really bad about something, and they're scaring people into compliance. That's not the same thing as people wanting to meet your needs. That's just a very young person, even if they're an adult, when they lose control. And 8, 9, and 1 try very hard to be in control. But we don't realize that our boundaries are constantly moving. We think, oh, I was very clear about my boundary. Now, maybe 9's not as much. But the boundary can be so far in or so far out or so far sideways that you don't know where the boundary is, let alone someone else. Kanika, what do you relate to about the discounting?
Well, I can relate to a lot of it, of course. A lot of it has been said already. To me, it always comes back to the knowing, realizing that I'm discounting something, because it goes so fast, like you said, that it's just like such a split second of actually forgetting that I had a need that I was putting, or, wanting to put forward. Like it just can switch. Oh, like, it's no problem. Oh, no need, don't worry about it. It's so fast that I just forget that there was a need to begin with. So like, I have to catch it. And yeah, I mean, so I can relate to it a lot. And for me, there's a little bit what Alex said about this showing up all the time, because it's really to check in what is really true right now. That's like a constant, what is really happening right now. And that needs to go a couple of layers down, because, there's so much upfront wanting to happen automatically that it really needs a moment. And when I get to do that, then I can also say what I need, but it's like, first I have to make that effort to stay with what's happening in the moment, rather than already moving on to what my automatic thing would be, which would be to, please, harmonize.
Well, what happens when you realize that you are angry? Do you sense in your body that you're uncomfortable? Do you go and find something that feels pleasurable? Or do you have your version of slamming a cupboard? A lot of 9s go physically kick the, especially as little kids, though, kick a rock or the mud, or they're physical gut types. So what would you do? And then, I mean, that's a clue that something buried is coming back up or sprouting roots and is going to envelop you soon. But what do you notice?
I mean, what I notice often is like a red flag for me is when I kind of glaze over. It's like a little bit like this kind of like, I've just left the building energetically. And that usually is like a sign for me to be like, okay, what just happened? And the best, if I catch it, to even say to whoever's there, just like, I just need a moment because something feels off. That's all I can say. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know, what I have to do, but that gives me, that little window to not, time, and not to to smooth it over, like, because what you said with the peanut butter, whatever, it's like that is so easy to do, to just, yeah. So it's the glazing over is like the go-to. I know all of them. I know also the kind of doing something to distract myself. I also know the kind of internal, and I also know the kind of hardening. I think they often mention like wooden, becoming kind of like
And stony. I mean,
stony. Exactly. It's like this endurance pose of like hardening up, and
like a rock, as opposed to wooden. It's of course a rock can be broken too, but yeah, I mean, because the 9 loves the trees, the big strong tree that is part of the environment, wooden does work, but a tree can also have a vine that grows on it and start to die out and be hollow inside. And that is what can happen to the 9 if they are not in touch with what they really feel. And they'll get angry about stupid stuff. Or one good thing is that 9s will love something equivalent to an action movie, fast action, or people getting angry. And it's a way to vicariously transfer their anger into something else. Other people that can't really show their sadness might want to watch a sad movie to handle that emotion, or others might want to watch something funny. So what do you find that you personally discount in yourself or others? How do you say, well, it doesn't matter, who cares? It's not my problem.
I mean, needs generally I find difficult, just to have needs and take them very seriously in myself and others. Like I find often that people take their needs too seriously. Like that, I can see that how, as much as I discount my own one, I will do the same with others. Like, don't make such a big deal about it. Like that. And the same, like, oh, I'm making a big deal about it if I'm asserting any kind of need that I feel is maybe, inconveniencing the situation, or
yeah, another way to look at it is, how do you look for okayness? 9s usually have a defense of it's okay, or you're okay. So a lot of times children of 9s will say, no, it wasn't okay, I had a fever or whatever. But the 9 might not want the child to be upset and just say, oh, you'll be okay. And skip over the part where this is the process you have to go through to get better. We have to do this or that. I have to take this medication. But talking, the 9 is very kinesthetic. And if they're not verbal, they'll just skip that part and say, oh, you're okay, but thinking that helps people. And it does for some types. Other types, they just feel invalidated.
Yeah, I just, what comes up is the worrying. Like, I have quite a few 6 friends, and I tend to want to go straight in for like, oh, don't worry about it. That's not going to happen. That's not and that infuriates them, obviously. And I had to learn that was not supportive, but also it was because that level of tension was uncomfortable for me to be around. So it's both. Yeah. So I'm trying to comfort them, but I'm also trying to get out of the situation where there's that kind of high
it's wanting to calm
nervous system level. Yeah, exactly.
So when the 9 is mute, it's because they don't want to create a problem, because the conflict will take too much energy. When the 9 is saying calm down, they're really saying, I can't take the distress. I can't take the agitation. So we think of the 9 as being mellow and reserved, And yes, 9 can do that if they check out. But if the 9 stays present, they have to deal with whatever emotion that is and allow it to run through. Because anything that we suppress comes back one way or another in a comment or something passive aggressive. It's not doing. There's 2 things I want to say, because you also said something important about needing that time. I would say one of the most important things when you hear a 9 say, I don't know, that is 9 saying, I need some time right now. Before I can even answer your question, I have to check in with myself. Like in the inquiry process, the 9 will say, I don't know. Maybe they'll know 10 of the things, and I keep going, and they go, I don't know. And if I say, just let yourself not know and guess, they've automatically got an answer, because it's not as critical. Because the 9 is looking for the most universal answer to anything and everything. And
I was just
go ahead.
I was just going to say about the I don't know, because I often feel that when there's an I don't know, there's a unconscious knowing of what I do know is going to probably create confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like avoiding it just a little longer, but I do know, actually, you know, it's but I do that.
Maybe not just confrontation, it could be distress. Something that makes you remember something you don't want to, or it doesn't have to be with that person. It can bring up anything. That's why one of the common expression is to kind of close the mouth, and that's a holding back. But if the 9 closes their mouth and moves back, it's like withheld information. Mm-hmm. And we don't know why or what's withheld, but we can see that with someone. Whereas ones will do it and kind of purse their lips. There's more, you can see the judgment. But social 9s have a lot of judgment, and it's a judgment, are you kind or are you unkind? Are you nice or not nice? 9s will say, oh yeah, I don't judge people. Yeah, you do. It's just done based on the value system of our type, our Enneagram type for all of us, as to what we do. Because for the 9, there's a pride in enduring, pride in being easygoing. And a lot of times 9s will say, oh yeah, I don't care about that, or that doesn't matter to me, well, it's no big deal. But there's also a pride in saying it's no big deal, it doesn't matter. Because underneath that is that it matters very much. And it really is sad for the 9 when people are unkind or not nice. And it makes 9s very angry. And all of a sudden, the 9 that maybe is going along to get along then wants to assert on behalf of someone who's being mistreated. Do you remember noticing that when you were a child? That you could be quiet and stand back, but if you saw something that was overtly unfair, that you would say something or do something?
I mean, I never felt like that, but I often get to hear, still today, I often get to hear from friends that if I say that I'm not confrontational, they actually think, they're like, what? You're not confrontational? Because I do speak up. But of course, there's 2 things. One, if it's not about me, that's definitely important. And the second one is that I have a very good way about the way I speak up. So that's the kind of mark that they always say, but you've got such a nice way of saying it and putting it. And so it never comes with the energy that I might feel behind it. So I want to, for instance, I'll go in there, like also with teenage already, like I'll go in there and I'll be like, yeah, but you have to see she didn't mean it like that. Like I'll go in and try and make the other person understand how the other person actually meant it. So it's yeah, I can speak up on behalf of somebody else if I think something is happening that's unfair or unkind.
And are
But
you
I'll
inclined to do that when the other person's not there, the person that was treated in an unkind manner? Are you more inclined to say something to that person privately, or do you say it in the moment? Does the impulse rise?
That's a good question. I think more privately.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be more inclined to say, yeah.
You're going to get less of a mismatch. Like if you miss the mark in any way and people then judge you, that's very painful to a 9, especially since the defense strategy is hardwired around being easygoing. Some version of so kind that you're not asserting, but you are. It's just you're doing it in your own way. But you do sacrifice a lot of your personal preferences in the moment. But it builds up kind of tension in the body. And then you can become irritable about something small. 8, 9, and 1 can all do that. But with the 9, it's more inclined to be a lot of little things that will upset you than the big thing that really bothers you. So you said something else too. The emotional need of the 9 is to avoid complication. And what 9s have shared is that when things are complicated, there's more likely going to be a conflict of some sort. That when things are easy and simple, then there's less of a chance that things will become difficult. I remember when I did that very, very, very first research, the questionnaire that I think you've all seen if you took the test, and 9s chose the word comfort more than any other word, and under avoidance was complication, or a word like complication. And then when interviewed, that's what they explained. Anything you'd say to that before I move?
I mean, for me, it sounds like it takes a lot of energy. Like that's what comes. Like I don't have that energy for that. It's too complicated. Like I don't see the point of it, and I don't want to.
What is it that you need energy for? Why would it take too much energy? What part of it?
I think there's several. Like I can see also on the kind of intellectual, it'll need focus. It'll need concentration. It'll need a staying with it for a longer period of time. It'll need, it'll on different levels. I think it depends on what it is actually, but it's like that's what comes up the first. It'll take a lot of energy. It could be emotional. It could be like physical work. It could be any number of.
And how about differences? Do differences, the potential for people having different opinions, take up a lot of energy?
Sure. There's two things happening. Sorry?
That's usually what's unknown by the 9. Is the
that differences take up a lot of energy.
Yeah, managing differences.
Yeah.
So the more complicated it is, the more the potential for differences, and then people might have conflict with each other or with you.
Totally, yeah.
And that's at the heart of it, that it takes away your ease. In fact, the idea of the hammock, strung between 2 trees. When I did that first research, a 9 sent in a picture of an empty hammock. And the 9s voted that they wanted that to be the center of their collage. So you can see this at katherinefauvre.com on the 9 board. All the collages are there. And I just said, well, wouldn't you prefer to see someone in the hammock relaxing and doing whatever? And they said no, because if it's empty, they can just go and sit in the hammock or lie down in the hammock. And if anyone's even nearby, it's just waiting for someone to want it. And the discomfort that it feels like for a 9, because you are kind of aware of this connection that everybody has to one another, and it isn't always comfortable. But wanting to just be able to go off by yourself, do something you want to enjoy, is a hard thing to do, especially for social. Because social, you want to be with people. You want to enjoy doing things with people.
Yeah, or even if we don't, we'll consider them. So it's better to be alone than, yeah, absolutely.
And then Alex.
Yes, yeah. So with the I don't know, what came to me when that came up was just the general desire of the instinctive triad to not be affected. So my I don't knows, or that's fines, or whatever simple turn of phrase that just says, okay, it's done, concluded, move on. That's me saying, I'm affected by this, but I don't want to be. So let's just end that, and then I can go back and explore it, from a safe distance. Because I guess, I don't know to what extent this is true of all types, but it seems for me as a 9, and tying into what you were saying about not wanting there to be a person in that hammock. If there's a person in my presence, I can't not think about that person. They're on my mind.
With 2 in the Tritype.
Yeah. And yeah, I just, I want that person to be happy and comfortable because they're in my environment, and by them being happy and comfortable, I can be happy and comfortable. If they're not happy and comfortable, then, I have my own sense of happiness and comfort, but they can only be so uncomfortable for so long in my space before I become uncomfortable too. And yeah. I think, in terms of like just contrasting mental space to physical space, I've seen over the trajectory of my adult life, which is kind of, I measure things by the trajectory of my adult life because that's what I've had the ability to have control over. My life just gets simpler and simpler and simpler and simpler because I'm just drawn to make things around me simpler and simpler and simpler. I don't have tons of big friend groups that I keep tabs on. I don't have a busy social schedule. I really want to do 2 things, which are spend time with my wife, who is the best, and to have a single focused work on something. But I don't want my work to be complicated, and so that just has like kind of got into a place where I've shed off a lot of layers, and I've had to upset a lot of people by not including them in what I'm doing. But I need this baseline of comfort and simplicity in order to have the capacity to deal with this other stuff that comes up day to day.
And you always did, actually. And the way you managed that was by having the closeness with your mom. So the 9 is going to find someone. I'm not saying that the 9 can't be angry and crusty and kind of the hard living 9. They exist too. But they still have the same defense strategy of wanting things simple, wanting things easy, and everyone getting along. Even if they're getting really irritable or angry. If they grew up in difficult circumstances, any type can be angry for that matter. But if the 9 grew up in difficult situations, then they'll be negating who they are. Let me say it that way. Negating what you believe, what you know to be true is a problem for the 9 when they realize it. When they're younger, it's just so natural to want to be appreciated and get the attention of a parent or a grandparent or a friend, that you let a lot go by. And then when the 9 kind of awakens to more of their true self, then there is a lot of, it's like you hit dominoes, that those dominoes were perfectly placed. And then it goes and splits. Not all the dominoes go down. You have to do them just right to have the dominoes keep going. And then the 9 has grown and is more aware and feels more at ease with themselves because of that awareness. But there's still more dominoes. Mm-hmm. Isn't until that situation arises that then you can work with that. And that's true of every Enneagram type, you're right. But it's how we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. So how do you unwittingly discount others? And what are you feeling when you do? When you say it doesn't matter or no big deal?
I think a big part of what I mask when I use those escapist phrases is judgment of the other, similar to what Kaneko was saying for, why don't you have yourself under control, right? Why are you making so many problems? And, I feel that to varying degrees with varying people. But I guess I've kind of, that's one of the things specifically, if I think about it, that I've probably worked on the most in the past year or two, as I entered the helping professions instead of being in real estate, doing the coaching and energy healing work and all of that. I guess it's sort of about cultivating real patience, because it's the one side of me wants to do right by all. And that guided me to want to have a career that I merged with, that it's, a unity of this is me, and putting that forward. But then in order to do a good job of doing that, I have to be truly patient, right? I have to be, set myself aside further, without losing the presence, and it's a hard balance to strike. But the moments when I invalidate people, I think it's sort of like this impatience that that as a 9, you never think of yourself as impatient, but the physical sensation, you get like a gut feeling of like literally in your belly of and then your mind starts going faster because you're trying to get out, and then you just,
do you know that you're thinking nice, not nice, or the other person's causing a problem? Do you know when you start to hear it, or you just feel it?
It's hard to catch it early. So there's a non-awareness as it's building, and then it has to build to a point where I'm willing to acknowledge it. And I'll also add that happens more. I catch it earlier when I am physically, rested, fed, and that I think that's a general problem for 9s. But with SP last for me, it's very easy for me to just forget to eat, or sleep for only a couple of hours, or it's very easy for me to forget to take care of my body, and so when I do, it's much easier to catch it early. But when a lot of my energy is already gone because I haven't cultivated the energy, then I get into what Kaneko was saying, where this is going to take a lot of effort for me to just walk step by step through the next 5 exchanges of the conversation.
That was a great one, because for the 9, it is all about energy. And that's why 9s can also identify as 5s, because in the early literature, it was the 5 that did not want to expend energy doing what they didn't want, because they wanted to conserve it for their own interests. But 9s don't want to spend energy in chaos. But the 5 will just leave. The 9 will stay there, but go to a sleep to themselves and just be gone, literally. and believable. You know, the 9 I was talking about, my husband, he would just sit on his hand. His mother would be talking. He was so used to it that he'd sit like this and he'd be asleep. Now, I'd know he was asleep. Why doesn't she know you're asleep? Because he had learned to have his eyes open, the whole thing, but he was gone. And as he couldn't take what she was stressed about, because that would raise the volume of his own stress. So the way he'd calm it down would go into a position where he could really be, but he was still aware that he was keeping his eyes open. He was checking out. It's not true sleep, but it does work if you're not aware of your type. So the other thing was how you're motivated. So what motivates you?
And that ties into one of the earliest points you made in this panel, which is the wings, you know, and like as a 9, and I'd never heard anyone say that before, actually, and that really rung true with me, that, you know, subconsciously I'm trying to be a 1 and I'm trying to be an 8. So, you know, what motivates me? I want to be good. I want to do the best that I can. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to half-ass it, you know, and you know, attempt something and have it, you know, flutter out and just amount to nothing, because that's not good enough. It's I want to be better, and at the same time, I want to be strong. I want to, you know, fulfill a caretaker role and be able to, you know, do what healthy 8s do and create a space where people can thrive. And there's a little bit of a inward looking, you know, I'm not this and I want to be that. And then through striving to be that, you know, I think that's where I've connected with the fact that actually that is all 9, you know. It's like how, you know, nine, you could say that 9's superpower is their vitality, and they just, you know, hold on to a piece of kryptonite all day, every day. But that's how I connect with it.
And we all have our kryptonite. It just, what is it? In the case of the 9, it's subduing the impulses, the visceral impulses. And in order to feel safe, I must pretend to not exist. I love the way Tom Condon teaches the centers. And he has it to, like for the hard types, be love for who I am. I must be who I'm not. And the head types, to have power, I must give it away and snatch it back. And then for the gut types, is to be loved, I must pretend that I don't exist. In other words, not be a problem. Now, obviously people say, whoa, but how does 8 do that? Well, it goes the other extreme. You're not paying attention to me, and I've been quiet, I've been good as a child. I'll make you notice. So it's still the same energy. Or the one says, I'll get it right. I'll do what's right, and then I'll get it. Because we're all looking for affirmation and attention, but we have different specialties. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, that I asked Kanika, she is a social 9, you're social 2nd, but the belonging, the sense of belonging, like all 9s want to belong to this universal family of man, but you can like not like people too. But so talk to me about the part of you that struggles with wanting to be that nice person, but having negative thoughts about a person, and how you manage that.
Yeah. I guess there's always the conflict between the social desire to, you know, connect and be safe and integrated with everyone, and the sexual desire to connect on a deeper level where there are things in common that I don't have in common with everyone, things where I am truly excited by someone's energy, someone's something. And so I guess my coping mechanism for that, and I'll tie in something that you and I talked about maybe 2 years ago, which is the whole man about town concept, where I was explaining how, in my real estate career, I always was dressed snazzy. I had suits on, I had fancy ties, I would bring energy, and make people behind counters laugh and just connect with everyone. Mm-hmm. Anytime one of those people that I just met in passing wanted to take a step closer, I wasn't there, because that wasn't someone that I really wanted to connect with on this deep personal level. And ultimately, I think from that desire, I think there can be only one. I think there's only room for one with the sexual first instinct. Maybe
there's always the favorite.
Yeah. And the way that manifests for me is, I guess now I have a stable connection in my marriage where we've been together for 5.5 years. Well, we've been married for 5.5 years together, 6.5 years or so. And it's very, 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 very stable. So I guess I have like kind of a perspective on that of, well, I like being friendly to people. I like helping people. I like connecting with people, but no one's ever going to be closer than this far, because I have this need fulfilled. But because I have this need fulfilled, I don't feel as much tension or anxiety about not being close to those other people. Whereas in the past, where I was really looking for that one-to-one connection and that really deep connection, that concept with every single person, I thought, well, maybe this will be the person, maybe this will be the person, maybe this will be the person,
Yeah. If you believe in love at first sight, you never stop looking. But if there's something that matches and there's a twinship, it's beyond exciting, and the energy goes up, where the self-pres wants the energy to go down and be secure, grounded, and the socials looking to the individual and looking to others at the same time. You've really highlighted something that was very important about why I teach the instincts the way I do, and it's different from most of the way people do. And that is that it's self-pres, social, sexual. Now, I could make a case for the other way around, depending on how you're defining the instincts. But Naranjo said that he felt it was self-pres because you have to survive. You have to make a bond to a degree with the caregiver, the mother, whoever's mirroring to you. Then you have to learn the rules, like of the house and potty training, and like what you can and can't do. And then among the people that are in your world, you then choose your favorite. So if you go off to school, it occurred to me it's exactly the same. Every time we go to a new school, we want to know where things are physically, like where the cafeteria is, where our classroom is, where we hang our coat. And then we have to know the rules of the teacher's rules or the school rules. But then after it's all new, we're looking around at all times, regardless of our instinct, looking for potential friends. But the sexual has a little antenna, like, is it a match? And when it does match, everything else goes away. And in the case of the 9, this is so important. Just as Kanako was talking about the community and the love of community and the group and needing to be with the group, that's an expression of 9 with social. But 9 with sexual is like total union and fusion. Like, you did it like this. But I loved Naranjo's description that the 9, it's like the amoeba, like complete and total mock symbiosis, that when the 9 is happy and bonded as a sexual, that they're one with their partner. and that's what they enjoy, is their partner and doing everything with their partner. Life without their chosen other, whether it's a best friend or a spouse or anything in between, a child, it could be a relationship with anyone that you're just totally close to. But then inevitably, like anything, that amoeba then divides and separates. So then you become you have a new aspect to your relationship. But that moment when there's variables, at first feels kind of dangerous to the sexual 9. But then when you realize, oh, now it's bigger, there might be a lot of versions of it. Can you speak to that at all as a sexual 9 of wanting that things to stay as they are and the change is difficult, but then when you realize, oh, wow, we have more, not less.
Yeah, and actually, that's such an interesting concept, because a lot of the discussion is always about people in isolation. But I guess I can reflect on seeing through the progression of our relationship. I've gone through phases of non-assertion and accommodation. And my wife is an 8 as well, so her needs were never swept under the rug, and I could see ways in which, I was comfortable stating my needs, but there are still areas where, if I'm not bringing myself forward assertively, then I'm not there enough. And in order to become more as a whole, I need to bring more forward. And actually, I'll give a perfect example of this. It ties in on many levels, but as I've been integrating the Enneagram into my work as a coach and learning deeper than I ever learned before, and uncovering untruths that we used to believe about the system, about certain types, about the assumptions, I've had to assert those and say, well, no, actually, this is the way this works. And maybe there's something under the surface here for you that we never dug into because we had this safe definition of who you are or who I am. So I think there is a tendency for the amoeba to solidify and be that size and say, I know this works, and do I want to risk shaking this? But as a pair, I think we have gradually expanded, and we both being sexual first, we have a priority on maintaining it as a unit. And because over time, basically the longer we're together, the more sure we can be that the other is just as committed as we are. And then the safer it becomes to be more and more and more and more and more ourselves. And then the more, our strengths come in and help it grow into something new.
And more rather than less, because it's being challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And then survives because we can't totally be the other. So it's a third force that comes into being, and that is the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And tending to the relationship then just gets bigger, but there are always 3 factions, but the sexual 9 wants it to be 1. Mm-hmm. So as you move out, it's always good, if you happen to be a sexual 9, to remember that there's actually always been the other person's individuality, your individuality, and then what's created together. Same with the socials, their group. They're always noticing people in groups. It's just, how do we define it? But the favorite is everything to the sexual, regardless of type. It's just most obvious with the sexual 9, just wanting to match their partner.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right, Val.
In terms of when I don't know, it depends on obviously what's being asked of me. From the trivial, it can be, yeah, whatever, that's no problem. Mm-hmm. To things which are deep and meaningful, which often can sometimes raise tension in me. and I find that sometimes there's just like there's a blockage. You can't say something. You don't want to say something. Because in my case, it's sometimes very much a case of wanting to explore the feelings or the thoughts, and you want to come back with a considerate answer.
Mm-hmm.
And
word, thank you. Nines use the word considerate, and if the 9 also has 2 in the tritype, that's magnified. But go ahead. Considerate.
Yeah, so it's either requesting for something or giving a considerate answer. It takes time, and because there's a pause, because you're tensed up, there becomes a pressure to reply and respond, because the other person's starting to get anxious. Why haven't you replied straight away? And it takes a life of its own. And I find that is kind of effectively because you haven't explored throughout one's childhood one's feelings or thoughts, or anyone actually asking for them and willing to wait for an answer, it becomes compounded. And that's I find that's the Achilles heel of nines, well, at least me anyway.
For sure, that would be true of each type. We're born with our type, our tritype, and our instinctual stacking, but our identifications with our type, our tritype, and our stacking is based on life experience. So we still need history, but we're going to look at anything that is problematic or difficult through the lens of our type. We're going to be evaluating things with what we were given to understand the world. But if we were wounded in that, and we will always be wounded in some way, it just depends on how intensely, how chronically we were wounded, will impact our resilience for our type to be in the healthy state, to be in the state where we could be neutral. Because having to be overly happy is disguising being sad. So neutral is really where we want to be, experiencing true joy and feeling fulfilled, but not focused on fulfillment. So yes, yeah, definitely that's how the 9 would experience it. But how about the way you run your sexual instinct? Do you understand more about this kind of desire for the union fusion? And then, as you were mentioning, what happens when you are so considerate and you don't feel considered? What it feels like inside, beginning in childhood.
I mean, in terms of the sexual side, it's very much, yeah. I mean, I've got some really, really good best friends who I feel relaxed with. I can say anything, and I don't feel, even if I say something silly, I know they don't take it personally, and that's completely different to other situations where I feel that you prefer not to say anything, simply not in case is taken the wrong way. So and not to cause any kind of conflict or tension.
And if you're off track, if something doesn't feel right on a visceral level, and you know that thing's off, and I'm going to the head because you've thought about it, you felt it, maybe you feel it in a burning in the heart, but there usually be a clenching in the gut, and then it goes to the mind as to what it means. But it's fuzzy thinking. It's not really using the intellect to try and solve it. It's going from conviction to thought, or conviction to our heart to thought. Do you know what that process is like for you? Can you name it in a really example?
In terms of conviction, because I can sort of balance lots of opinions or ideas. I know when something there's a conviction in me is when it sits comfortably,
Mhm.
and then I will speak up and effectively sort of fight that cause or that point based on what I feel is definitely the way it ought to be or it is.
Well, the thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that was it. Yeah, that was all. Yeah.
The thing I was going to mention is that in this kind of fear of discordance, of states, disharmony, acrimony, or estrangement from friends, that the 9 might look like they're okay with it, but it's just a defense strategy, making it okay. That's why okayness is a word used with 9, because you have to make it okay or you feel really intense fear, anger, and shame, just as I mentioned, because all the centers are merged. And that the 9 is a part of the gut center, as I also mentioned, and the gut types own their own authority. They're not dependent on authority like the heart types are for that feedback. Yeah, you're great, you're wonderful, good job. That's what heart types need to hear. And they need to hear it 3 times to give meaning to their experience. And then the 9 in particular is looking like, no, I'm not trying to be in charge here or anything. But actually the 9's very much autonomous. And they will pursue what they value and will hold steady. But a way to have power is to be stubborn. Maybe you'll zip it and not say the thing you shouldn't, but it'll show in your face becoming stony. That's what all gut types do. And it's like heart types can do it, but there's kind of a coldness from the eyes, whereas with gut types, it's like you don't exist. So the fear for us is that we couldn't exist as we were, or we couldn't change like the heart types or the head types. We were just who we were or are. And it was either liked or disliked. So if you think about the way in which you feel that, come on, do you feel it in the gut, then the heart, then the head? Do you feel it in your shoulders? Where do you feel your tension first? Or when you know you're having emotions different than you're cognitively aware
of? I'd say for me, it's in the gut initially. And then in the throat.
And does it feel
and the sort of jaw.
Or how does it?
Sorry.
How does it feel in the throat?
It's restrictive because you can't speak, and so the only way, I guess, probably, like you say, it becomes stony because you've frozen up.
Yeah, you can't display your displeasure, but yet you can withhold your emotional connection. But 9s just totally learn to be like the false neutral when they're hurting or they're angry, just like anybody else. But that's very important because I hear that from all gut types, but in particular the 9, because they're holding back what they can say. Now the ones will do it if they shouldn't say something. They'll feel that, but you'll see it. I can't quite do. And they just, one brow go up, like they'll cock their eye, which is why the eagle and the hawk are assigned to 1s. But with 8s, it's like a gorilla. Don't mess with me. I'm not going to do anything. But if you mess with me, you're going to hear from me. Whereas the 9 is like the gentle giant, energetically more like the elephant, or a peace-seeking creature that if they get upset, you want to get out of their way. So the gut center is all like that. But if you were to give yourself a symbol or a creature that would exemplify your energy, what would you say? Like I just mentioned the elephant. Would you think of something different?
The thing that comes to my mind is more for like a volcano. The idea is like I can channel energy or store it. Sometimes it just leaks out, other times it explodes. That's the kind of the image that I sort of see myself, and don't particularly like it, but I'm trying to look at the positive sides of being able to at least channel that energy.
Mm-hmm. And a volcano is a great one for the 9, because even though it's not always erupting, it's always heating up and can erupt if there's just too much there. The other thing is some 9s will identify more with like being the turtle, just sea turtle, following the current. So some 9s identify with literally just putting themselves in a comfortable position so there's not so much effort striving, and then the energy's there when they need it. But a symbol of a volcano is actually excellent for a 9. Excellent, excellent. And what people don't realize is how much the 9 has let go by, until, or, you know, the straw that breaks the camel's back. Well, the 9 has allowed many, many grievances to not be called out. So when the 9 does get upset, they've been hurting a long time, and in a big way. And a lot of people don't really understand that. And you really describe it very well by giving the volcano the association. Now, anybody that gets angry can say it's a volcano, but there's a quality with 9 where you're trying to keep it down. But eventually, if there are injustices, indignities, not fair play, all the times that you've been silent, eventually the 9 says something to their boss or their coworker or the person that's mistreating them. So thank you. Now, the one thing I want to ask about is, do you understand about the 9 saying yes because you don't want to say no, and saying maybe when you really mean no? Do you relate to that at all? That yes means maybe and maybe means absolutely not. But
yeah, very much so. Yeah. Maybe is one where I will try come back to somebody with an answer very quickly. No, on the other hand, is a very difficult sometimes answer to give, unless it's something to do like with food. So I won't eat it because I'm not hungry. But it predominantly is a yes, even when it should be a no or even a maybe. It tends to be a yes.
Yeah, and that goes back to the initial fear of being separate from others and not wanting to risk it. And like the whole center deals with it in their own way. Like the 8s do it the opposite way. The 8 will say no, and then they'll say, wait, what were you asking? And then once they've had their minute, no gives them their minute, and then they let in what the person's really asking. Go, oh yeah, I can do that. But commitments mean everything to gut types. So if you give a commitment, it's really unsettling to not fulfill it. So if you can't say no and you're saying yes to more than you want, then you're going to feel overburdened. You're going to feel like you're not existing again. And then that puts the 9 on guard for that kind of lava to be building up. So the most important thing is to say, I'm not certain, and then get back to the person. Just teaching a habit of, I'm not sure about that. I'd like to, but I'm not sure about that. And then getting back to that person right away. No, I'm not going to be able to do that. But it's so, so, so hard for a 9.
Yeah, I think it sort of goes back sort of to the mountain analogy where you just weather it. You can take it. You can take another yes until, I guess, life gets the better of you and you can't take any more. You have to replace it with new lava, or or you just worn down completely.
Or you have a wet storm that maybe sizzles some of that, but it's still an emotional storm either way. But just to say weathered is another great example of vocabulary that a 9 would use in that context. Because what is happening when you weather something? You're enduring. You are enduring circumstances that are not ideal, that you would not choose to have to endure, but you do choose it ultimately because you want to continue working for that company or whatever relationship you're in, or your family dynamics. You have to weather a lot of things. Thank you very much, Val. Okay, Kanika, how do you relate to yes meaning maybe and maybe meaning absolutely not? How does it show up for you?
Well, I want to say I learned the hard way, because I think we all 9s did. That is not the way to go. It's still extremely difficult, but it's something that I'm really practicing. But my no will most likely sound more like I'd rather not, like something kind of softened. But because I know it so well, I really, again, it's that checking into the moment. And I agree with you that the time really helps, like to say, let me think about it. But I also find that then also the guilt can start if I have too much time to think on it. So
thank you.
So
guilt. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if I get to really check in the moment and then just be honest and kind of, just bite the bullet right then and there, I often feel relieved that I don't have to, deal with the uncomfortability of knowing that I'm going to say no for too long, or having to say no, because that's actually what my truth is. So it's getting better. I'm getting clearer, and I also really see clarity as a value that I'm really working towards. Yeah. And actually a value that I also feel 9s really have if they get to that place of where they can check in with themselves and where they, just choose for their own truth, above.
How was it for you as a child? Could you say no at all? Did you have to be really upset to say no?
I can't remember so well. I would say probably not, but I can't tell you for sure. What I do know is that kind of a physical feeling of like wanting to dodge something, but not really.
Yeah, that's good.
Good
word. And the other thing is dread. A lot of times 9s will feel dread, and you just brought up such an important point about guilt. 9s are actually negatively motivated by guilt. Mm-hmm. So if something happens that leads to the 9 feeling that they're not as kind as they need to be or want to be, or as thoughtful or helpful as they need to be or want to be or think they should be, then they do have overwhelming guilt that makes it very hard to say no or maybe. But what's helpful for all of us to understand is that what's building with the 9, as they're giving even beyond what they have to give, is that resentment is building. So guilt is a variation on resentment. It's motivating because you want to get rid of the negative emotion. So like some people are sensitive to guilt and some people aren't. And in the case of the gut types, in an odd way, we feel we're immune to guilt. But if we put that guilt on ourselves, different story. So if you realize something or heard something that maybe was not who your ideal person self would be, then there is a lot of punishment that comes your way. But how do you know that you do it? How are you hard on yourself? Guilt, yes. But you'll end up doing the thing you don't want to do. But won't you also start distancing from people and situations that ask too much of you?
Totally. Absolutely. It's definitely, there's an emotional disconnect starts happening. And actually somebody said, it was early in my 20s, somebody said to me that guilt is inverted anger, which I thought was really like that really just flipped a switch, because it is somehow the guilt is still the anger about other people being able to make me feel that way, you know.
Or doing something that causes you to feel that way. That's then the next step, that your defense strategy is hardwired to feel that way.
Right, because it doesn't even mean they are making me feel guilty at all. They might be absolutely okay with me saying no. So it is really just the internal and what that looks like. Yes, so it's an emotional distancing. The judgment comes often with the resentment, and then it's also like this spinning out where I think we move towards the 6 of kind of just overthinking of, you know, like having these dialogues in the head of like, I should, but you know what, the other person's going to say this, and you kind of stand in for how they're going to respond, and then it just
and
kind
you
of
have
starts.
6 in the Tritype. But the really important thing to understand about 9 is no decision is a decision. So a lot of times 9s will try to postpone something so they don't have to deal with the conflict. But it is declaring a position. It's not truly neutral. It's like avoidant.
And that also, that I've just learned with the years, that is actually like eats up a lot of energy as well. So we actually think we're avoiding having to deal with it, but it just sucks energy big time. So I try and avoid not to postpone it at this point, you know, because I just know the cost, and the cost is, apart from the energy that it takes, it does just create disconnection, which is the opposite of what we want. So,
and it does create double binds for sure. But the high side of the 9 is this unbelievable ability to just be present to others wherever they are without judgment. That is the high side, the non-judgmental, truly neutral, but compassionate, benevolent way a 9 can be present to another person in a natural way. Go ahead.
I just one word that came in that context for me is often it's a sense of being cornered. Like that's something that comes to me a lot, that feeling of like I can't move, you know, like both is just not right. Like I can't move this way or that way. And that's an infuriating and very, like it's infuriating, and at the same time it's like how do you say, what's
like
the
a
word in
no-win
English?
situation?
Yeah, but when you want to give up,
Oh, yes. Yes. It's self-negating, and self-neglect, but it also brings into awareness is something else that's really important. And that is that the 9 is usually finding situations where they're caught between two choices. In a way, you just mentioned it. Well, should I do this? That's not quite right. Should I do that? I don't know. Like, 9s will often stay in that state rather than looking at the third option, which takes energy to find the answer that combines both what they like about both situations and eliminates more of what they don't like. But it's a very common place for 9. Let's say they own 2 homes. They might say, well, I like that home because it's in the desert, it's warm, it's nice in the wintertime, sunny. But no, I don't like it because it's hot in the summertime. Oh, I like the house up north because we have friends, we're in a smaller community, and these reasons. And spending years with that rather than figuring out where the 9s want to be, especially if it's a double 9 couple, and then putting the effort into making the decision about what matters to them, and then finding like a new home that meets more of their needs. But that's just so true. Indecisiveness plays out in a number of ways, but it's not because you're not intelligent. The way Naranjo described the 9 was functionally dumb, meaning dumb as see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Like if you don't say it or don't let it in what you've heard or even your own thoughts, then you don't have to rock the boat. Because if you rock the boat, you'll have to do something about it. And back to energy, it's very uncomfortable for a 9 if they start something that mobilizes, and it's going to expose a deeper feeling the 9 has that maybe they're not ready to deal with. It's like cleaning house. When a 9 starts cleaning house, they do that major clean. But it's easier to not quite notice things until you have the energy to do so. Gosh, that was so great. You brought that up. Thank you.
Also, the thing I said about clarity, it's almost like when you do see it, there's like, that's how I feel, at least. I don't know if my fellow 9s feel like that, but then I have to deal with it. It's like I can't not anymore.
You have to.
That makes sense.
It's mobilized. And so the 9 can be unhappy for a long time at a job or in any scenario, friendship, and they just reach their saturation point, and then they just stop responding. They won't overtly reject in most cases. They just eventually don't call back. But they'll answer the phone, hi, how are you? Yeah, fine, good. But the 9 won't say, hey, let's get together for lunch. They slowly fade away. Just like, well, 2 people that were very close, let's say from childhood, then they just get further and further away.
Yeah, or that switch, like, okay, you've got a relationship and you hang in there, you hang in there, you hang in there, and then suddenly you pack your bags and you're out the door one day, and the partner's like, well, you were unhappy, like just kind of, it seems out of the blue for them, and the 9s feels like, I've been hanging in here for a really long time.
Exactly.
Enduring.
And usually there are no dress rehearsals, meaning usually the 9 is not overtly threatening, although 9s can be emotional too, but they're just going along and allowing for their partner until they've reached a point where, wait, I haven't been considered. And then they might rock that boat because they've already rocked it. They've been rocking it. Have you ever been in a rowboat where you kind of put your weight on both sides and you get the rowboat to go up and down? Well, the 9's been doing that. So eventually it's going to flip over. And when it does, it's a totally different boat. It's no longer up, it's upside down. But the 9's then ready. But if it happens to the 9, it's the other way around. It takes the 9 a long time to, they'll shut down immediately, pretty immediately, but not so long that they don't get to integration, but sometimes they don't. They just stay in a state of suspended animation, like things are just stopped. And in their mind or their heart or their gut, they might have an idealized image of the way they want it to be, and it isn't integrated. Might not be totally unpleasant, but on a fundamental level, it's buried. So yes. Thank you. So now I want to ask each of you very quickly to close this, what you think, and I'll begin with Alex, what did I not cover? Or what should we know about 9 that I didn't mention or the conversations didn't bring about? Anything?
Sure. I guess if I relate back to just what I've seen work for me, in terms of making things better for myself rather than not, one of the, like, almost as much as, if not more than, learning about myself and my tendencies, just learning about my physical body and how to maintain it. Again, I have SP last, but I think it's true for all 9s. I mean, when I don't have the physical energy, I cannot act in an emotionally healthy way. And there's this like deferral of responsibility for 9s where it's like, I'm going to check out. And if in order to continue, someone else has to like keep you going. But if you break out of that tendency, engaging in your physical health really makes such a psychological difference for how you feel. Just literally how you feel. You won't feel as I've improved my health, and I'm 30 years old, and I was having like health problems in my 20s because I wasn't doing a good job maintaining my body. And I had no idea that I wasn't doing a good job. I was doing what it seemed like everyone else was doing. So that, I think, is like, it's just incredibly, incredibly important.
Thank you, because physicality in general is really good for 9s to get into their body, because body-based type, but not in touch with their body. Whatever center we're from, we actually don't do it well. We pseudo do it well. We might be focused on our body in one way, but not in another. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just to close the loop is just that emotionally, and the 9 tendencies literally guide you to want your body to feel less vital and less alive and less active, because that's an emotional liability. If you have the energy to fight the fight, it's harder to choose not to fight it.
Excellent. Excellent. So true. Thank you. How about you, Val? Is there anything that I left out that's important, or you just want to say?
I like the analogy of the dust kind of thing. And I was thinking that the problem with 9s is that we tend to let the dust collect, rather than, not saying do it in an OCD manner, but just deal with the dust as and when you see it, as opposed to let it build up, because it does build up and it becomes overwhelming. Not that you can't deal with it, it's just you probably hurt people along the way, and you probably hurt yourself as a result as well.
Yeah, thank you, because what happens with the 9 being kind of indifferent can make the 9 seem very callous and uncaring. And it's the exact opposite of what the 9 wants, or the healthy 9. But if the 9 builds up the calluses to avoid the blister, the pain of the blister, then they're no longer able to connect with others in the way that they want. So that innocence I was talking about, that the 9 can have, that optimistic, wanting to change the world energy, caring about people in the universe, can just switch if the deadening comes in. So yes, keeping it, the aliveness, as Alex mentioned too, is so important, because deadness kind of breaks the rapport with people. There isn't a connection that's so wanted, actually. Thank you. Tonica?
Yeah, what came up also, it kind of is in the same context as well, but the word resistance we haven't talked about yet, which I think one really important part for me is to, stop. I want to say not stop resisting the resistance, surrendering to the resistance, like something about leaning into discomfort, or to, well, just embrace it in a way, because it is there where we actually, meet life, that aliveness comes in that place where we move towards discomfort, or at least breathe into it, if you want,
risk it.
Or risk it, yes.
The discomfort.
But so I often feel like when something impacts me, there's an immediate resistance. So it can be good things, bad things, doesn't really matter, anything that kind of rocks the boat, or and so rather than going with that resistance, or giving that energy, I find it extremely important to just soften that and just breathe into that and just surrender that resistance.
That's so true. Thank you. And that's why I opened with patience, persistence, and resistance. That it's a very powerful combination for 9 that can be used in support of the right actions that they want to take, and can also keep them from being aware of what they're not allowing. So the identification with the others or life in general could be like, yeah, I'm fine, no problem. But resisting something, knowing that there's something not working or something you need to put your attention to. And if you, in a way, use the high side of 9 to allow yourself, and patiently allow yourself to have moments that might be perceived as less than ideal. Not the way other types want to be ideal, but the way the 9 wants to be ideal. And that is to not be a problem, not cause a problem, and not like 6, who doesn't want to get in trouble with others, but it's being a problem. And to really move as a 9 is to use that anger as something that lets you know that you want to change something. It's only when it becomes rage or so deadened that it's not meaningful. If it's just being aware of the anger, you know something important is on the table, and there might be a decision you have to make, and that you won't die if you make the decision, because our defense strategies kind of give us that idea. And the resistance to change for the 9 is the fear of not existing. So it's not by chance that 9s don't welcome change. But once you move into change, it's the most phenomenal thing to see. When a 9 starts dealing with their stacks that they've piled so high, they need a bunch of trucks to come and pick it all up emotionally, because they've stored other people's emotions as well as their own. So yes, breathe into it is excellent. There are a lot of methodologies that help the different types. This is just beginning to touch the surface as to what the 9 emotionally needs, and that when they're not seeing you, it's because they can't see themselves in that moment, or they might be seeing something that's very painful to see. And if we have compassion for the 9 and realize how hard they're trying to keep everyone calm, and that the way the 9 feels connected to everything in their environment, it helps to give those that aren't 9s the bandwidth to understand it's not personal. The 9 suffers just the way the other types suffer. It's just as harder to see because they're not necessarily complaining about it as much. There is like the -9 and the +9, the identification, and that's just based on tritype. But it's a matter of, if we know and understand all 9 types and every combination, then there is no really serious problem, because we get it at a core level. Now, we can do that for ourselves, but it's very hard. Same with others. We might understand it intellectually, but the real way through is to understand the emotional feelings, that how desperate it feels to each type when they're triggered. And they're not trying to be difficult. It's a combination of what the defense strategy is meant to notify the type of, and how wounded they are. And you put those 2 things together, and any type can act out or act in. So I can't thank you guys enough, and thank you for staying up so late and early. I really, really appreciate it. So I'll say goodbye to everybody. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Pleasure having you all.